The war between Russia and Ukraine has become one of the most devastating and complex conflicts of the modern era. On the morning of February 24, 2022, the world awoke to a new era. On Vladimir Putin's orders, the Russian army launched a multi-pronged attack on Ukrainian territory. Advancing from the north through Belarus to Kiev, from the east to the Donbas region, and from the south through Crimea, the troops moved rapidly in the first days of the war. The Kremlin's plan was simple: to take Kiev within a few weeks, overthrow the Zelensky government, and bring Ukraine back under Russian control. However, these plans did not work out. Ukrainian people showed a resistance rarely seen in modern history. Ordinary people took up arms. Women, the elderly, and students took part in the city's defenses. The Western world also immediately supported this resistance. The US, UK, and European Union countries sent billions of dollars in military and economic aid. Russia, meanwhile, faced harsh economic sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and the escalating costs of war. But Putin did not back down. On the contrary, as the war dragged on, he changed his strategy. Instead of a quick victory, he shifted to a protracted war of attrition. Even now, as we approach the end of 2025, the war continues. Although the front line has shifted, the goal remains the same: to sever Ukraine from the West and bring it back into Russia's sphere of influence. So why did Putin attack Ukraine? The answer to this question is not only military. It also has historical, ideological, and psychological dimensions. In Putin's view of the world, Ukraine is not just any country. In his eyes, Ukraine is part of Russian history and identity. In his speeches over the years, he has said, "Russians and Ukrainians are one people." This sentence actually explains the essence of the war. Because the Kremlin sees Ukraine's independence as a historical mistake. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Moscow lost not only territory but also psychological superiority. Putin has never been able to accept this loss. Therefore, regaining control over Ukraine is not only a strategic move for him, but also an attempt to take revenge for the past. The desire to go down in history as the leader who restored Russia's greatness is central to Putin's political career. To this end, he is willing to risk his country's economy, its young population, and its diplomatic reputation. However, another reason is the perception of security. Russia views NATO's eastward expansion in particular as a threat to its security. Since the 1990s, Poland, Romania, and the Baltic states have joined NATO. As a result, NATO's borders now extend to Russia's doorstep. The possibility of Ukraine joining NATO was a red line for the Kremlin. For this reason, Putin wants to keep Ukraine as a buffer zone between the West and Russia. If Ukraine joins NATO, Western missiles could be deployed directly at Moscow's doorstep. Although the Kremlin defined the war as a preventive move to prevent this possibility, it was not actually a defensive but an aggressive expansion policy. There is also a domestic policy dimension. In Russia, Putin's power is now almost entirely based on war. Economic problems, corruption, unemployment, lack of freedom of expression, all of these are pushed into the background with the propaganda that the West is attacking us and we are defending ourselves. This rhetoric both distracts the public from domestic issues and keeps support for the regime alive. Thus, Putin keeps nationalist sentiments alive domestically while trying to maintain his image as a strong leader abroad. The war in Ukraine has actually turned into a war to preserve power rather than to gain territory. But now a new question is on the agenda. After Ukraine, who is Putin's next target? According to some analysts, after cementing its gains in Ukraine, the Kremlin may turn its attention to the Baltic region. And in this scenario, the most notable country is Lithuania. Why Lithuania? First, let's start with geographical reasons. Lithuania is located between Poland and Russia's Kaliningrad region. Kaliningrad is Russia's most important military outpost on the Baltic Sea. The narrow land corridor between Poland and Lithuania is called the Suwalki Corridor. This region is as fragile as it is strategic for NATO. If Russia were to seize this corridor one day, The Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, would lose their land connection entirely. This would make it nearly impossible for NATO to deliver military support to the region. That is why the Suwalki Line is described as Europe's most dangerous region. From Putin's perspective, Lithuania could be both a strategic and psychological opportunity. There is already a strong Russian military presence in Kaliningrad, air defense systems, short-range nuclear missiles, and naval bases. If the Kremlin creates a small provocation on the Baltic border, it could test NATO's unity and resolve. For Putin, this would be a warning shot to the West. He may want to gauge NATO's resilience by raising the question, are you really united? On the Lithuanian side, concern is growing. The country's leadership has nearly doubled its defense budget in recent years, reinstated compulsory military service, and allowed NATO troops to be permanently stationed there. The public often asks, are we next? This concern is not unfounded. In recent months, Russian aircraft have violated Lithuanian airspace several times. Drones have been sent to border areas, and anti-Lithuanian propaganda in the Russian media has increased. These are all signs of a classic hybrid war. So, could Russia really attack Lithuania? A full-scale invasion similar to the one in Ukraine does not seem very likely at this point. This is because Lithuania is a NATO member. Such an attack would trigger NATO's Article 5, which would directly drag Russia into a war with the West. However, Putin prefers a strategy of creating uncertainty rather than direct conflict. Cyber attacks, disinformation, energy pressure, and border provocations. These are tools the Kremlin could also use against Lithuania. Wars are no longer fought only with tanks. They are also fought with information flows, energy lines, and cyber attacks. Still, history teaches us one thing. Putin does not wait when he sees an opportunity. He invaded Georgia in 2008, annexed Crimea in 2014, and attacked Ukraine in 2022. Each time he said, "We are defending ourselves," but each time he was the aggressor. Therefore, even if the Lithuania scenario seems distant today, the Baltic region has always been part of Russia's long-term plans. This is because the region is both NATO's eastern border and steeped in the shadow of its Soviet past. Lithuania, meanwhile, is trying to be prepared for a possible threat. The defense minister recently said, "If we don't stop Russia now, tomorrow may be too late." This is not just a fear, but a warning to Europe. Because Europe's security does not end at Ukraine's borders. If Putin gets what he wants in Ukraine, this sends a dangerous message to other small countries. No one is untouchable. Today, the world is polarizing once again. On one side is the Western alliance, on the other is Russia and the countries that indirectly support it. The war in Ukraine is no longer just between two countries, but has become a struggle between global powers. Putin is exploiting Europe's